The first time I walked into her classroom, I felt it, a subtle but undeniable shift in the air, as if the room itself recognized me differently than I had ever been seen before. I had spent years blending in, pretending to be exactly like everyone else, never wanting attention, never wanting to stand out. But that day, under her gaze, I felt exposed in a way that was thrilling and terrifying all at once. Her voice carried over the room, calm but commanding, and it made me flinch slightly, though not in fear. More like anticipation. I couldn't explain it, and I didn't want to. I found my seat in the back, hoping to melt into anonymity, but her eyes followed me like a spotlight. Every small movement I made felt magnified. Every subtle shift of expression seemed to matter. Later, she asked me to stay behind after class. My heart thumped unevenly, each beat echoing in my ears. I wanted to say no. I wanted to run. And yet, something inside me, a curiosity I had buried for years, kept my feet planted. I watched her as she closed the door gently, the click of the latch sending a shiver down my spine. "I've noticed you," she said softly, almost conspiratorially. "Not just your behavior, but your potential." My chest tightened. The word potential felt heavy and strange, like a door opening to something I hadn't dared to imagine. Over the next days, small changes began. She encouraged me to notice my reflection more, to explore how subtle choices, the tilt of my head, the sway of my shoulders, the way I moved, could express a different side of myself. At first, I resisted, afraid of being seen, afraid of what I might discover. But her guidance was patient, gentle, insistent without being harsh. I started with tiny experiments, a scarf draped differently, a soft gesture in my hand, a careful adjustment of posture. Each attempt made me more aware of my own body, of how the world saw me, and of how I wanted to see myself. I began to feel the stirrings of a person I had kept hidden for so long. By the end of the week, the changes were subtle but undeniable. Even my friends noticed, though they didn't question it aloud. I could feel myself standing taller, speaking with a quieter confidence, and sensing the first flickers of the freedom I had always longed for but never allowed myself to grasp. And yet, with every small step forward, I also felt a tension deep inside, the realization that exploring this side of me would not be easy. There would be challenges, judgment, self-doubt. But for the first time, I understood that growth often begins in discomfort, and curiosity, once awakened, refuses to be ignored. The following Monday, I arrived at school earlier than usual, my backpack feeling heavier than it should, though it wasn't filled with books. It was filled with anticipation, nervous energy, and the strange, new tension of not knowing exactly what I would discover about myself. The hallway was familiar, the lockers lined up like always, the chatter of students weaving through the air, but everything felt sharper, brighter, more intense. I was aware of every step, every breath, every flicker of my own reflection in the shiny surfaces around me. Her classroom door loomed ahead, and I hesitated for a heartbeat. But then she appeared, standing by her desk, calm and poised, as if she had been waiting for me all along. Her eyes met mine, and I felt a warmth that was part reassurance, part challenge. "Today," she said softly, almost as a whisper, "we're going to explore more of who you are, quietly, carefully, but fully. Are you ready?" I swallowed hard, the word ready echoing in my mind. I wasn't sure I was, but I nodded. And in that nod, I felt the first flicker of trust not just in her, but in myself. The first exercise was simple but unnervingly intimate. Posture. She had me stand, feet slightly apart, shoulders relaxed but lifted, chin tilted just enough to feel confident without arrogance. She demonstrated, and I mirrored her slowly, my movements awkward at first, my reflection in the window pane a stranger I was still learning to recognize. "Notice the difference," she said, her voice calm, measured. "Posture isn't just about appearance. It's how you carry your presence. It tells the world who you are before you even speak." As I shifted my stance, a subtle sensation moved through me, the awareness that my body could communicate in ways I had never permitted myself to explore. I noticed the curve of my shoulders, the small tension in my back, the sway of my hips, and I realized that this wasn't just about standing differently. It was about existing differently. Next came gestures. She asked me to lift my hands, move them slowly, explore how softness and intentionality could change the way I was perceived. My fingers trembled at first, self-conscious, but with her patient guidance, I began to feel them as extensions of expression rather than mere appendages. She watched intently, correcting nothing, letting me discover the rhythm on my own. Afterward, she brought out scarves, ribbons, and a small collection of accessories, soft, tactile objects meant to enhance, not mask, who I was. "These are tools," she said, "not disguises. Use them to explore how you feel, not just how you look." I held a pale pink scarf, feeling the silk against my skin. The sensation was electric in its simplicity, a brush of fabric, a gentle shift in color, and suddenly I was aware of a side of myself I had never acknowledged before. Over the next few hours, we experimented with subtle clothing adjustments, gentle touches, ways of moving that felt both foreign and instinctively correct. Each small act was a revelation, a tilt of the head that made my neck feel delicate yet strong, a careful step that shifted my balance and made me aware of my hips, the way the scarf fell around my shoulders and transformed the familiar into something new. By the end of the day, I was exhausted, but in that exhaustion was something unexpected: exhilaration. The nervous tension in my chest had been replaced with a delicate, fragile pride. I caught my reflection in the window as we left the classroom, and for the first time, I didn't flinch. I recognized myself, not fully, not perfectly, but enough to feel a thrill of possibility. And yet, beneath that pride, there was still tension. A whisper of fear lingered. What if I wasn't ready for the world outside this classroom? What if the curiosity, once awakened, brought with it judgment, misunderstanding, or self-doubt? She noticed the hesitation in my eyes. "The journey isn't about perfection," she said softly. "It's about discovery, about noticing yourself, feeling yourself, and learning to inhabit the world fully, one step at a time. There will be moments that scare you. That's part of growth. But you're ready to face them, I promise." I nodded again, my chest tight with a strange combination of fear, excitement, and something that felt dangerously like anticipation. That evening, at home, I caught myself practicing in the mirror, replicating gestures she had taught me, noticing subtle curves, shifts, and expressions. The reflection staring back was still unfamiliar, still a stranger in many ways, but it was mine, and that realization brought a tremor of something I had never felt before: belonging. The thought lingered in my mind long after I went to bed. Each step, each small adjustment, each careful movement was part of a transformation that reached far beyond the classroom. I didn't yet know where it would lead, or what challenges awaited outside the protective bubble of guidance and instruction. But one thing was clear: I had glimpsed a version of myself that I could no longer ignore, and the desire to explore it further had already taken root. The next morning, I woke with a strange mix of anticipation and unease. The lessons from yesterday clung to me like a second skin, their subtle rhythms replaying in my mind: the tilt of my chin, the sway of my hips, the soft curves of gestures I hadn't dared to notice before. As I dressed in the outfit Mom, or rather my teacher, had suggested the night before, I felt both excitement and a flicker of apprehension. Today wasn't about private practice. Today was about seeing myself in the reflection of the world beyond the classroom. The walk to school felt different. Each step was deliberate, conscious. I noticed the way my shoulders moved, the sway of the skirt, the soft brushing of my hair against my cheek. Even the familiar streets seemed sharper, more vivid, almost as if the world itself were waiting to see me in a new light. And maybe it was. When I arrived, she greeted me with that same calm, yet commanding presence. "Today," she said, "we'll take another step. You're going to meet the world beyond this room, and I'll be here to guide you." Her eyes held that same steady, unreadable gaze that made my chest tighten. I knew she would push me, but I also knew she wouldn't abandon me. The first part of the day was subtle: walking through hallways, observing reactions, learning to inhabit space fully. At first, I felt exposed, almost painfully aware of every glance, every whisper, every footstep echoing in the corridors. But then, slowly, I began to notice something extraordinary. Most of it didn't matter. Most people weren't judging. Most people weren't noticing me at all. And that realization, oddly, was freeing. We stopped by the library, and she encouraged me to interact more directly, to ask questions, speak in my own voice, notice how it carried through space. My voice wavered at first, quiet and unsure, but as the minutes passed, it grew steadier. I realized that each word I spoke, each movement I made, was a tiny act of assertion, a subtle declaration of presence. After lunch, she took me to a small, quiet courtyard. Sunlight spilled across the stone tiles, and the air carried a faint scent of flowers from nearby planters. Here, away from crowds, she encouraged me to experiment more boldly. I tried new gestures, adjusting my stance, letting my hands move naturally rather than stiffly. I tilted my head, allowed my eyes to soften, practiced subtle smiles that felt strange yet liberating. By mid-afternoon, the small triumphs of the day began to accumulate. I caught glimpses of myself in windows and reflective surfaces, a figure moving with a tentative confidence, a presence growing more comfortable in its own skin. Each adjustment felt like peeling away a layer of hesitation, revealing something delicate, vulnerable, yet undeniably strong beneath. But growth never comes without tension. A sudden remark from a peer, nothing harsh, just a teasing question about my new style, made my chest tighten and my stomach churn. My initial instinct was to retreat, to shrink back, to hide behind the walls of anonymity I had built for so long. But I remembered her words, courage is moving forward despite fear. I held my head high, replied softly, and felt a quiet thrill at surviving the first real test of external observation. The teacher's quiet approval, a simple nod, grounded me. I realized that part of the journey wasn't just about self-discovery in private. It was about navigating reactions, judgments, and the unpredictable rhythm of others' perceptions. Every glance, every word, every subtle interaction became a mirror, reflecting not just the world, but who I was becoming within it. By the time the school day ended, exhaustion and exhilaration swirled together in my chest. I walked home slowly, noticing the way the sunlight caught my hair, the sway of my skirt, the lift of my chin with each step. I felt fragile, yet stronger than I had in years. I had tested myself. I had faced small moments of judgment, small challenges, and emerged intact, maybe even a little braver. That evening, in the quiet of my room, I practiced again in the mirror. I replayed the day in my mind, noticing subtle triumphs, tiny hesitations, gestures that had gone unobserved but felt monumental to me. Each adjustment was a conversation with myself, a negotiation of identity, a quiet affirmation that the path I was on was mine, tentative, uneven, but deeply real. And as I drifted off to sleep, I felt the stirrings of anticipation for the days to come. I knew the journey was far from over. I knew challenges, doubts, and tests still awaited me. But for the first time, I felt the fragile thrill of possibility, a sense that who I was becoming might just survive the scrutiny of the world outside, and that the next step, however uncertain, was worth taking. The morning sunlight spilled through my window in golden streaks, catching the soft folds of my clothing and the gentle curves of my reflection in the mirror. I paused for a moment, letting my eyes trace every line, every subtle change I had started to notice over the past few days. The girl staring back was familiar, yet different, softer, more deliberate, and undeniably me. My heartbeat quickened at the thought of the day ahead. When I arrived at her classroom, she greeted me with that same calm, unwavering presence. Today, she said, we'll explore more than gestures and posture. Today, you'll begin to experiment with how you present yourself more boldly. And I will guide you. Her words carried a thrill of promise, but also a quiet weight, an understanding that stepping forward would demand courage. Our first exercise was subtle, yet transformative. She asked me to choose colors and textures I had never dared wear before: scarves in soft pastels, ribbons that brushed my skin, blouses with gentle frills that felt almost alive. The fabric felt electric under my fingertips, a whisper of possibility. As I draped a pale pink scarf around my shoulders, I caught a glimpse of myself in the window pane. My reflection seemed taller, steadier, alive with something fragile yet powerful. Next, she guided me through facial expressions: a tilt of the chin, a softening of the eyes, a slow, deliberate smile. Each small adjustment felt unnatural at first, like learning a language I had always been afraid to speak. But as the minutes passed, it became less about mimicry and more about discovery. I began to recognize subtle truths in my reflection: a quiet courage, a fragile confidence, and a sense of identity that I had never allowed myself to explore fully. Afterward, she asked me to walk through the hallways slowly, noticing reactions, observing reflections in glass and polished surfaces, and allowing my posture and gestures to communicate something deeper than words. My first steps were tense, each movement self-conscious, each glance a potential threat. But gradually, a rhythm emerged, a balance between caution and expression, between fear and curiosity. At lunch, she encouraged me to join a small group of students quietly, to test how my presence could inhabit space outside the safety of guided exercises. My chest tightened as I approached them, the awareness of eyes on me like a current beneath my skin. A few smiles, a gentle laugh at a joke, and I realized something extraordinary. I could exist here. I could interact. I could move through the world without shrinking entirely. The afternoon was spent experimenting with small, personal adjustments: the angle of a wrist, the curve of a shoulder, the subtle sway of my skirt as I walked. Each act was both a practice and a revelation. I felt the boundaries of identity stretch, contract, and shift in ways I hadn't imagined possible. With every step, I felt myself emerging, not fully formed, not without doubt, but undeniably evolving. By the end of the day, exhaustion mingled with exhilaration. Walking home, I noticed the way the sun caught my hair, how shadows lengthened across the pavement, how every small movement carried weight and meaning. In my room that evening, I stared long into the mirror, replaying each moment, each gesture, each nuanced shift. The reflection staring back was still unfamiliar, but I recognized it in ways I hadn't before. It was me, evolving, daring, learning to inhabit space fully. And yet, beneath the thrill, a quiet tension lingered, the knowledge that each new step, each daring gesture, carried with it the potential for exposure, judgment, and self-doubt. I wasn't naive. I understood that the world could be harsh, even when it seemed welcoming. But in that tension, I also felt something new: determination. I would not hide. I would continue to explore, to grow, to step forward, even when the path was uncertain. As I drifted off to sleep that night, the memory of her gaze, her calm encouragement, and the gentle brush of fabric against my skin lingered. I knew the journey ahead would be challenging, emotional, and transformative. And for the first time, I felt ready, not fully fearless, but ready to confront the unknown, one careful, deliberate step at a time. The next day, the air felt heavier somehow, as if the world itself knew that the lessons I had begun were about to deepen. I woke early, before the sun had fully risen, the faint light spilling across my room like a soft promise. I caught myself in the mirror again, studying the subtle changes in my posture, my expressions, the way the clothes I had started to favor hugged my frame differently. There was a fragile excitement in it, a thrill tinged with a quiet apprehension. When I arrived at her classroom, she was waiting, calm, poised, and commanding without a word. The small smile she offered was reassuring, yet carried that unmistakable hint of expectation. "Today," she said softly, "we're going to challenge more than appearance. We're going to test your comfort with yourself in ways that will be uncomfortable, and that's exactly the point." My stomach fluttered. I had begun to expect these exercises to be delicate and gentle, but her words hinted at something more intense, more revealing. My heartbeat picked up as I followed her to a small, empty corner of the classroom, where the sunlight spilled like a golden spotlight onto the floor. The first task was subtle but demanding movement. She instructed me to walk across the room slowly, deliberately, while maintaining eye contact with my own reflection in a mirrored surface she had set up. At first, I faltered. My steps felt exaggerated, my gestures awkward. Every misstep felt like a failure, yet she stood silently, letting me struggle, letting me find my own rhythm. After several attempts, I began to feel a strange synergy, a connection between the sway of my hips, the tilt of my head, the rise and fall of my chest. The girl in the reflection no longer felt entirely foreign. She was emerging, fragile yet undeniable, and for the first time, I felt a quiet pulse of pride. Next came facial expression. She had me practice subtle smiles, controlled shifts of the eyes, gestures that conveyed confidence without arrogance. Each motion was a revelation. I noticed how a slight curve of the lips could transform my entire demeanor, how softening my gaze could make my presence feel lighter, more inviting, more me. But then came the challenge that made my chest tighten. Interaction. She instructed me to approach a small group of students during a break and engage in conversation, using the gestures, expressions, and subtle posture adjustments I had practiced. My stomach turned. I had grown comfortable in private spaces, in controlled environments, but here, among peers, the fear was almost tangible. I hesitated at the door, heart pounding, fingers trembling. She placed a steady hand on my shoulder. "You've prepared for this. Trust yourself. Trust the lessons. Move forward, even if you're scared." Taking a deep breath, I stepped out, each movement deliberate, each gesture rehearsed yet natural. The initial moments were awkward. I stumbled over words, laughed nervously, shifted my posture. But as the conversation continued, I began to find a rhythm. I noticed small reactions, subtle nods, gentle smiles, and felt an unfamiliar warmth blossom in my chest. I was being seen, not mocked, not judged harshly.
Seen.
And the sensation was intoxicating. The rest of the afternoon was spent in similar exercises, small public demonstrations, quiet reflections, and private coaching. Each act chipped away at layers of fear and hesitation, revealing glimpses of a confidence I had never known. And yet, beneath the thrill, a tension remained. A whisper in the back of my mind: the world is unpredictable. You will face moments that unsettle you, moments that challenge everything you think you know about yourself. As I left school that day, walking home beneath the amber glow of evening, I felt the pulse of transformation in every step. I noticed the sway of my skirt, the lift of my chin, the way my hands moved with newfound awareness. Each motion was a rehearsal for encounters I had yet to experience. That night, in the quiet of my room, I replayed every moment. I traced gestures in the air, mimicked expressions, studied the subtle shifts in reflection. The girl in the mirror was no longer a stranger. She was fragile, yes, uncertain, yes, but undeniably real. And for the first time, I felt the quiet thrill of possibility, the understanding that this journey, no matter how frightening, was mine to navigate, and that each challenge, each moment of discomfort, was a step toward discovering the person I had longed to become. The morning air was crisp, carrying with it a quiet energy that made my heart thrum in a way I hadn't experienced before. Even the familiar streets felt different today, sharper, brighter, as if the world itself were holding its breath, waiting for me to step fully into a version of myself I had only begun to glimpse. When I arrived at her classroom, she was already there, calm and poised, her eyes observing me with that same gentle authority that had become both comforting and thrilling. "Today," she said softly, "we'll explore more daring expressions of who you are. We'll challenge comfort, push boundaries, but remember, this is your journey, and you control the steps you take." I swallowed hard, feeling a knot of excitement and apprehension tighten in my chest. The exercises so far had been delicate, subtle, teaching me posture, gestures, and expression. But today felt different. Today, she was inviting me to step further, to experiment in ways that would make me more vulnerable, more visible, and more real. She opened a small wardrobe tucked in the corner of the room. Soft fabrics, pastel colors, delicate patterns, clothes I had never dared imagine wearing, were carefully arranged on hangers. She handed me a flowing blouse and a skirt, the textures soft and inviting against my fingertips. My breath caught as I felt the silk and cotton brush against my skin, a sensation both strange and electric. "Try them on," she said, her voice quiet, patient, yet imbued with a gentle insistence. "Notice how they feel. Don't think of them as disguises. Think of them as extensions of yourself." In the privacy of a side room, I changed. The fabric slid against my skin, warm and oddly comforting. As I looked in the mirror, I felt a strange shiver of recognition. The reflection was still unfamiliar, but now it carried hints of something I had long kept hidden: softness, vulnerability, and an emerging confidence that surprised me. We began with movement again, practicing slow walks, deliberate gestures, and small interactions. But today there was a new element: awareness of presence in public spaces. She guided me toward the hallway, toward windows that reflected both ourselves and the activity of students beyond. Each step was deliberate, a rehearsal in courage. I noticed how the skirt swayed, how my hands moved naturally, how the tilt of my chin shifted perception, not just my perception of myself, but how I imagined the world might see me. Then came the real test. She asked me to step outside into the school courtyard. I felt a flicker of panic at the thought of being seen by others in this unfamiliar persona. My stomach churned, my heart raced. But she remained beside me, calm and grounding, letting me know without words that I could take it at my own pace. I walked slowly, every movement measured, aware of the subtle reactions of my peers, a glance here, a whisper there. I felt exposed, undeniably visible, yet something extraordinary happened. I began to notice moments of connection rather than judgment. Subtle smiles, casual nods, and the gentle acceptance of those who didn't even know the depth of what I was experiencing. The day continued with private coaching, experimenting with expressions, gestures, and small accessories, ribbons in my hair, a delicate bracelet around my wrist. Each adjustment felt like a quiet act of courage, a statement that I was stepping into a self I had long denied. And each act brought its own emotional tremor: fear, excitement, pride, and a fragile exhilaration that made my chest feel simultaneously heavy and light. By the afternoon, exhaustion mingled with a profound sense of possibility. I caught my reflection in a window and held the gaze of the emerging girl within. She was fragile, yes, uncertain, yes, but undeniably real. I had begun to feel the thrill of inhabiting my own presence fully, even in spaces where the world might observe. Walking home later, the streetlights casting long shadows, I felt the pulse of transformation in every step. I realized that the journey was no longer confined to the classroom or to her guidance. It was expanding, reaching into the world outside, carrying with it challenges, judgments, and discoveries I had yet to encounter. That night, I practiced in the mirror again, savoring each subtle gesture, each careful adjustment, each expression that began to feel naturally mine. I knew the path ahead would test me, that exposure and doubt awaited. But in that moment, I also felt a quiet certainty. I was ready to continue, to explore, to move forward one brave, deliberate step at a time. The days that followed felt strangely weightless, as if reality itself had shifted slightly under my feet. I walked through the corridors of school with a new kind of awareness, an invisible electricity that ran through me every time I caught a glimpse of myself reflected in a glass door or the surface of a classroom window. The person I saw staring back no longer looked like the one I had known all my life. There was softness there, a certain vulnerability, and hidden beneath it all, a faint spark of confidence. I still wore my regular clothes, of course, but something in me had changed. Even in the way I carried my backpack, The way I moved my hands, or how I looked up when someone called my name, I could feel the difference. My teacher noticed it too. "You're beginning to breathe differently," she said one morning, her eyes soft with something I couldn't quite name. "You're letting yourself be seen." That single sentence stayed with me for days. But not everyone looked at me with the same quiet understanding she did. The changes, subtle as they were, didn't escape the attention of a few students who were always quick to notice difference. It started small, whispers when I passed by, looks that lingered a little too long, muffled laughter that stopped the moment I turned my head. The first time I overheard my name in a hallway conversation, I froze. "He's acting weird lately," someone said. Like, softer or something. My heart stung at that word, softer, even though part of me knew it wasn't wrong. I tried to brush it off, to focus on the quiet encouragements that came from her, my teacher, the one person who made the noise fade away. She continued to guide me gently, every day shaping my confidence in small ways that began to root deeper than I expected. One afternoon, she asked me to stay after class. The others filed out, their chatter fading into the distance, until it was just the two of us in the warm amber light of the setting sun streaming through the blinds. She stood by the window, her voice calm but serious. "You're starting to feel the world's eyes on you, aren't you?" I nodded, unable to find words. "It's not easy," she continued, "but transformation never is. What you're learning isn't just about expression, it's about truth. And truth always demands courage." Her words struck deep. I didn't realize until that moment how much of my life had been spent hiding, not just from others, but from myself. The quiet, daily fear of being noticed, judged, or misunderstood had become so normal that I hadn't even seen how much of me it had stolen. She stepped closer, her tone gentler now. "I want you to remember something. Every time someone looks at you and doesn't understand, that's not a failure. It's proof that you're becoming something they haven't yet learned to see." I left that room feeling like I was walking through two worlds at once, the one where I was expected to stay as I had always been, and the one where I was slowly, cautiously, learning to exist as who I might truly be. That evening, I sat in front of my mirror for what felt like hours. My teacher had given me a small box earlier that day, telling me to open it only when I was ready. When I finally lifted the lid, I found a simple item inside, a pale pink hair clip shaped like a tiny bow. Nothing extravagant, just delicate. I hesitated before placing it in my hair. But when I did, I couldn't stop staring. It was such a small thing, yet it felt monumental, as if it quietly declared something I hadn't yet been able to say aloud. The next morning, I wore it again, not in public, but tucked away beneath my hoodie, hidden in my hair where no one could see unless they looked closely. It was my secret, a quiet promise to myself. As days passed, those small, private affirmations began to build a strange strength inside me. Each time I stepped outside, I carried a little more confidence, a little more self-awareness. The whispers still happened, but they began to fade into the background, replaced by something far more powerful, the realization that I was learning to exist for myself, not for their approval. Then one day, everything shifted again. I arrived at class to find a note on my desk, folded neatly. The handwriting was unfamiliar. "Meet me after school in the art room. Don't tell anyone." My stomach tightened as I read it again. For a long moment, I debated whether it was some kind of cruel trick. But curiosity, and maybe something deeper, won. When the final bell rang, I waited until the halls were nearly empty before walking to the art room. The door was slightly ajar, the air filled with the faint smell of paint and clay. Inside, my teacher stood near a canvas, her expression unreadable. "I wanted to show you something," she said quietly, turning the canvas around. What I saw made my breath catch. It was a portrait unfinished, but unmistakably me. Except not quite. The face on the canvas was softer, more open, eyes painted with light and quiet strength. It was me, but the version she saw when I couldn't see myself. Before I could speak, she said, "This is who you're becoming. And I think it's time others start seeing it too." My heart pounded in my chest. "What do you mean?" She smiled faintly. "There's an exhibition next week. I want you to help me present it." And just like that, I knew whatever was coming next would change everything. For the rest of that day, I couldn't think of anything else. The image of that half-finished portrait lingered in my mind like a song I couldn't stop humming, haunting, beautiful, confusing. It wasn't just that she had painted me, it was how she had painted me. The version on that canvas looked freer, lighter, as if they had already stepped beyond the limits that still held me. I sat through my other classes, barely listening. My pen hovered above blank pages, and my thoughts drifted back to the way she'd said, "It's time others start seeing it too." The words echoed inside me like a challenge. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay awake staring at the ceiling, the glow from the streetlights slipping through the blinds, and wondered what she truly meant. Did she really want to show that portrait in public? Was I ready for something like that? The idea both thrilled and terrified me. When I saw her the next morning, she was calm as ever. "I knew you'd come early," she said, glancing up from her desk. "You've been thinking about it, haven't you?" I nodded. I don't know if I can do it. What if people see? What if they judge?" she finished softly. "They might. Some will. But that's never stopped the truth from existing, has it?" I didn't answer. She walked toward the canvas, still resting near the window, and gently brushed a few new strokes across the cheek of the painted figure. "You know," she said, "when artists paint, they're never just trying to capture what they see. They're trying to reveal what's been hidden, the beauty even the subject doesn't recognize yet. That's what this is. A reflection of what you keep trying to hide, even though it's been visible to me from the start." Her words settled deep in me, stirring a strange mixture of fear and pride. I looked at the painting again, and for the first time, I didn't flinch. Over the following days, preparation for the art exhibition consumed every spare moment. I helped her organize frames, hang pieces, adjust lighting. The school's art gallery space was small, tucked behind the main hall, but it carried an intimacy that felt both comforting and dangerous, like a stage with no curtain to hide behind. By the end of the week, the portrait was complete. She had titled it Becoming. I stared at the label for a long time, feeling the weight of the word. The night before the exhibition, I almost backed out. I stood in front of the mirror, hands gripping the edge of the sink, and asked myself if I could really let people see that side of me. The softness, the vulnerability, the truth. I looked so ordinary in my reflection, but beneath the surface, I felt like two people colliding, neither fully formed. That's when my phone buzzed. A message from her. "Courage doesn't mean you're not afraid. It means you're showing up anyway. I'll see you tomorrow." Those words were enough to make me stay. The next day, the school was buzzing with anticipation. Students and teachers moved through the halls carrying refreshments, adjusting displays, laughing nervously. I stayed mostly quiet, keeping to the side, watching the crowd gather. The air smelled faintly of paint and new paper. When people began filtering into the art room, my heart raced so fast I thought it might burst. I stood near the back, my hoodie pulled tight, and tried to disappear into the wall. But then, I saw it. The painting hanging beneath soft lights, surrounded by murmuring voices. At first, no one recognized me. They just admired the portrait, tilting their heads, commenting on the colors, the expression, the delicate emotion captured in the eyes. But slowly, inevitably, someone noticed. "Wait," a voice whispered. "Is that?" A ripple passed through the room. I felt my throat tighten as faces turned toward me, realization dawning in their expressions. For a split second, I wanted the ground to open and swallow me whole. But then, amidst the murmurs and the uncertain stares, I saw her. My teacher, standing near the edge of the crowd, her eyes calm and proud. She didn't need to say a word. Her expression told me everything. Don't hide. So I didn't. I stepped forward, slowly, one careful breath at a time. The whispers softened. My hands were shaking, but I held my head up. The portrait loomed before me, a mirror of what I could be. And in that moment, I realized something profound. The fear hadn't disappeared. It was still there, but it no longer owned me. Someone asked quietly, "Is it really you?" I nodded. No one laughed. No one shouted. Some smiled, some didn't understand, and that was okay. I wasn't here for their approval. I was here because I finally wanted to exist without apology. When I turned toward her, my teacher gave a small nod, proud, knowing, almost emotional. It wasn't triumph I saw in her face. It was recognition. That night, as the exhibition ended and the crowd dispersed, I helped her pack the remaining frames. She placed a hand on my shoulder and said softly, "You took the first step. Now comes the rest." "The rest?" I asked. She smiled faintly. "Becoming yourself isn't something you do once. It's something you wake up and choose again every day." As I walked home under the cold evening sky, the wind tugging gently at my hair, I understood what she meant. Change wasn't a single moment. It was a slow unfolding, one that had only just begun. And though I didn't know it yet, the days ahead would test everything I had learned, because with visibility came consequences I hadn't imagined, and choices I wasn't sure I was ready to make. The days after she showed me the sketchbook felt different, quieter, yet charged with a kind of invisible current. Every time I stepped into her classroom, I saw her differently now. Not just as the teacher who had helped me, but as someone who had fought her own silent battles and learned to wear the truth she once hid. She never mentioned the sketchbook again, but I could feel the unspoken connection between us, like two mirrors reflecting each other's hidden reflections. The air in that room always seemed a little warmer, the silence more meaningful. Outside the classroom, though, the noise of the world hadn't softened. Rumors still swirled, whispers still lingered, and the stares still burned. Yet something in me had shifted. Their words still hurt, but they no longer reached the part of me that mattered most. Because that part had finally begun to believe in itself. Sometimes, after school, I'd catch glimpses of my reflection in shop windows and barely recognize myself, not because I looked completely different, but because I felt different. My movements had changed, my expression had softened, and I'd stopped hiding my curiosity behind fear. It was like watching a sketch slowly transform into a painting. One afternoon, near the end of the semester, she asked me to meet her after class again. Her tone was gentle, but there was something behind it, something thoughtful, maybe even sad. When I arrived, the room was filled with late afternoon light, golden and quiet. The smell of chalk dust and paint mingled softly in the air. She was sitting by her desk, a small stack of papers in front of her. "You've grown," she said simply, as I took a seat. "Not just in confidence, but in awareness. Do you feel it?" I nodded. "It's like I'm learning how to be real." She smiled faintly. "That's the hardest lesson of all." We talked for a while, about art, about courage, about the strange loneliness that comes when you start to outgrow the masks you used to wear. But then her tone changed. "There's something you should know," she said, her fingers tracing the edge of the papers on her desk. "It's about what I told you before, my past." I felt my heartbeat quicken. "The rest of the story?" She nodded slowly. "Yes. You've reached the point where you're strong enough to hear it." She stood and walked to the cabinet behind her desk, one I'd never seen her open before. From inside, she pulled out a small wooden box, old and carefully carved with delicate patterns. She held it for a moment, her thumb brushing over its lid, then set it between us. "This box," she said quietly, "contains the part of my life that came before teaching, before I became the person you know. I haven't opened it in years." I looked at it, unsure whether to speak. The air between us felt charged, almost electric. She met my eyes. "I want to show you what's inside," she whispered. "But if I do, you'll have to promise something, that you'll see it not as a story about me, but as a reflection of what's waiting for you." I hesitated, words caught in my throat. I wanted to ask what she meant, but the seriousness in her tone made me fall silent. She reached for the lid, then stopped. Her hand hovered just above it, trembling slightly. "No," she said softly, almost to herself. "Not today. You're not ready yet. But soon." My chest tightened. "What's inside?" I asked quietly. She smiled, but it wasn't the calm, knowing smile I was used to. This one was gentler, sadder. A truth that connects us both, she said. And once you know it, nothing between us will ever be the same. Before I could respond, the bell rang in the hallway, its sharp clang breaking the fragile stillness. She closed the box, locking it with a soft click. Go on, she said, her voice steady again. We'll talk about it later. I wanted to stay, to ask, to understand, but something in her expression told me not to push. So I gathered my things and walked toward the door. Just before I left, she called out, remember, transformation isn't only about appearance. It's about uncovering what's been hidden all along. I turned, but she was already looking down at her desk, her hand resting on the closed box. The fading light cast long shadows across the room, wrapping her in gold and gray. I stepped into the hallway, my mind spinning. A truth that connects us both. The words echoed in my head like a quiet drumbeat. That night, I couldn't sleep. I kept replaying the moment she almost opened the box. Her hesitation, her eyes, the weight in her voice. What could possibly be inside? What could she mean by nothing between us will ever be the same? The more I thought about it, the more I realized that my story, our story, wasn't ending. It was only beginning. And somewhere in that closed box waited the key to everything I hadn't yet understood about her and about myself. End of Chapter 1. Cherry Blossom, to be continued in Chapter 2. The Box and the Secret Within.